Hello and welcome to Freedom from Fear, a German New Medicine podcast. I'm your host, Ashlee Newberry.
And I'm your other host, Abigail Puccioni. Please be aware that nothing discussed here on this podcast should be taken as medical advice.
Consult your trusted professionals and your own inner knowing before making any health decisions.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Freedom from Fear. We're super happy to have you here. And today we're going to be talking about a very highly requested topic, which is hanging healings and tracks. We're going to be diving into discussing what a hanging healing is and what tracks are and how to identify tracks, how to resolve tracks, and some really cool stories to illustrate just how wide of a variety there can be when it comes to different tracks that people experience. And I know a lot of you are probably wondering, okay, what the heck is a track if you're new to GNM? And another word that you can use quite interchangeably with track is actually trigger. So anytime you hear us say track, it might resonate more with you if you think of it as a trigger. So Ashlee is going to talk a little bit more about the tracks, but real quick, I'm going to describe the basic concept of what a hanging healing is. So in GNM, again, according to the second biological law, you have the active conflict phase, and then you have, I should back up. You have the conflict shock, and your body starts adapting, right? So you have conflict, and then you're in the active conflict phase, and this will vary depending on how long you were in that, we call it sympathetic atonic state, and how long you were in that fight or flight state when you were in the active conflict state. And then when the conflict is resolved, you move into what we call the healing phase. So that's a very basic description of it. If you want more info about this, go to our episode titled Intro to the 5 Biological Laws. I think that's what it's called.
Yes.
Yes. So that is how the normal 2-phase pattern works in German New Medicine. However, most people are not just dealing with a one-time sore throat or flu or different symptoms that might pop up that you don't have on a regular basis. Most people are dealing with chronic symptoms. And so when we're talking about chronic symptoms, that's what's going to point towards a hanging healing. And we call this a hanging healing because essentially the body, has the conflict shock, your psyche, has the conflict shock, you are in the active conflict phase, and then you resolve the conflict, or, you kind of come to peace about it. There's some sort of resolution, and then you enter the healing phase. But then this is where, what we call stepping on a track happens, and you basically go back into the active conflict phase. So it's kind of like, I've used this example before. If you have a stab wound on your arm, you got stabbed with a knife. I know, I always jumped like a very
violent,
graphic scenario here. But yeah, so imagine you have a stab wound, right? And your body will naturally start trying to heal that up for you. Your body knows how to heal. The wound will start to, there's inflammation, maybe some pus, it's doing its work, it's, closing up. And then every day you decide to take a knife and just kind of stick it just a little bit in there. You're keeping the wound from completely healing, right? Because you're just re-stabbing yourself essentially every day. And so, of course, your body is not going to be able to finish out the healing phase, the repair phase, when you are doing that. So as Ashlee will describe, stepping on a track is akin to that, you stabbing yourself with the knife every day. So it's basically a return to the conflict active phase. And then you move back into the healing. So this is where we have chronic symptoms pop up. And so, and I'll emphasize this later too, but chronic conflicts in your life, the things that are heavy on your mind, the conflicts you're dealing with in your life, chronic conflicts equal chronic symptoms. Yep. So with that being said, Ashlee, take it away. Help us understand, what is a track?
So a track is this subconscious reminder that when you ate this food, you're around this pollen, this person, this time of year, some type of reminder of the original conflict shock gets embedded into your subconscious brain. And we'll talk about, what defines like what could be a track. But there is some reminder in your subconscious that last time you experienced this thing, something bad happened. And a great analogy that I use to explain tracks is when you're driving down the road, you see the sign that says there's a traffic light ahead, right? Sometimes there's like a flashing light. Sometimes it's just the sign that shows a picture of the traffic light. Maybe you're going up a hill and you can't see the traffic light yet. So it's warning, hey, there's a traffic light ahead. Might be red. You might need to stop, right? And tracks are like that. It's like this warning signal that, hey, last time, again, that you ate this food, you did this thing, you were with this person, something bad happened. And so then when we step on the track, which means we were triggered in some way, we ate the gluten that we have symptoms with every time we eat. And it's this reminder, it's this subconscious, and you don't even have to know that. Let's use gluten as an example. You don't even have to know consciously that there's gluten in what you're eating, because your body knows, right? And so that's the track, right? Let's keep using gluten as an example. And so when you eat something with gluten in it, you have digestive symptoms and you're like, okay, well, it's the gluten. But really, the gluten is this reminder to your body, to your subconscious, that sometime in the past, there was the original conflict shock where, let's say you're eating toast with butter on it, right? And you get this phone call that something's happened to a loved one or something, and that's the conflict shock. And you can't digest that morsel, but you're eating the bread, you're eating the glutinous bread, the delicious bread.
The glutinous bread.
That's a word, right?
Yeah.
And so then it's the gluten that becomes this reminder to your brain that, oh, it's not safe. Because again, like I said, in the past, you had this association that your subconscious took a snapshot when you were in that conflict active mode of the pollen, the things you're eating, the things that were in your line of sight, maybe even colors you were around, people, time of year, the season, the time of day. Like all of these different things can become what German New Medicine calls as tracks. And so every time you step on that track, or you eat that food, you're around this person, whatever, you go through the 2-phase cycle. So that's going back to the second biological law, the law of 2 phases. And like Abigail said earlier, you can go back and listen to the intro to the 5 biological laws if you're not quite familiar with that. And so you kind of go through the 2 phases kind of like quickly in some cases, whereas sometimes it's more slow, and we'll give examples of that later on. So if you're noticing, okay, this symptom keeps popping up every time I eat gluten, you're probably going through the phases really quickly. But we always go through the 2 phases, whether it's a first time, like a new conflict shock, a new DHS, or it's a track. A track just mimics the conflict shock, but it's not about the original thing. It's something else that your brain has taken a snapshot of. That's like, oh, this is a reminder. This thing is dangerous. And then you have symptoms, you have healing symptoms as soon as you step off that track. So, for example, a few years ago, I was doing face yoga religiously before I was going to do this branding photo shoot in Hawaii. This was back in 2021. And so I get up in the morning and make my tea and, get ready for the day. And I'm like, okay, it's time to do my face yoga exercise. So I go in the bathroom, watch this little video, and I'm touching my face, getting to the muscles in my face. So kind of pressing sometimes hard, more than just normal every day you touch your face. And so I was doing this every day, like I said, religiously. Like I really wanted to work on some things with facial symmetry and stuff. Anyway, not important. But sometimes later in the day, I would notice that I would have some pimples pop up. And I'm like, what is this? I was like, I already had resolved. And if you guys don't know my story, one of my main symptoms that I resolved using GNM was acne. Had it for 13 years, tried everything before finding GNM, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I hadn't really had any breakouts in a number of years, or like, one pimple every once in a while, but I was having kind of a lot of them, a lot of small ones. And after doing face yoga, and I was like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, what is this? I don't understand. Like, I've already healed this. Like, why? Like, why do I have this symptom? And it took me a little bit and some questions from my coach. And I was like, oh, I have a track that it's not okay to touch my face. That it's not safe to touch my face, because growing up, like, that's like my family that didn't really have acne didn't really understand. And none of us knew German New Medicine at the time. Like, my family would always be like, oh, don't touch your face, stop touching your face, don't pick at your face. Like that was why that I had pimples, which
right, or that the bacteria from your hands is, oh yeah, all that bad bacteria on there, and then you're touching your face, like, how dirty.
yeah
How feeling soiled, right?
Exactly. And then I also felt attacked with them telling me to not touch my face. So it was a little more complicated and layered, but I'm sure it was both of them. But I realized I still had this subconscious track with touching my face, that wasn't okay, and that was going to cause my acne, right? And so even though I had resolved a lot of the acne stuff, like, previously, this for me was still stepping on a track. And the amount of touching my face with this face yoga program was like a lot. And it's not just like lightly, it's like pressing into the skin to get to the muscles and stuff, depending on what exercises you're doing. And once I realized, oh, this is about like touching my face, and I had to kind of redo how I was approaching face yoga. And I just had to tell myself, like, okay, it's safe to touch my face. It's okay to touch my face. And after a couple weeks of that, there was no more pimples, no more acne. I could still do face yoga without having any breakouts. And the fact that this was years ago, when I still lived at home, like, this was high school, college, that my subconscious still remembered the stuff about touching my face, right? And so sometimes this stuff is really subtle, and it's not always easily accessible, or it's just more under the surface and maybe not as obvious as a food or something. But in this case, the track for me was touching my face, right? It wasn't a food. Right. It wasn't anything I was ingesting, or even anything I was putting on my face. It wasn't a product. It wasn't a makeup. It wasn't a face cream. It was literally my hands touching my face.
And anytime someone's saying, oh, this product causes me to break out, or this, eating this food causes this symptom, like, anytime someone's talking about something, external to them causing a symptom, what's going on here is that, well, that thing is definitely causing the symptom there. It's not just all in their head. Like, and I want to make that really clear, because I think some people misinterpret this a little bit like that. Let's go back to the example of gluten. And let's talk about, celiac disease, right? What's going on with celiac disease is that someone has had a pretty big, indigestible morsel conflict, or a few different indigestible morsel conflicts, and gluten was picked up as a track. And so in that situation, and again, going back to what Ashlee was saying about, it does not need to necessarily be conscious. Like, you don't have to be aware that you're eating the gluten, because that little particle of gluten is actually causing that is the track, right? And your body picks up on that, whether you're aware or not. And so, for example, you hear this happen a lot. Someone with celiac disease goes into a restaurant, tries to make sure that, okay, you're a gluten-free facility. Okay, we're all good. They go to eat their meal. and lo and behold, they get really sick. Well, they find out that there was some cross-contamination and there were little particles of gluten in their food. And then a lot of times when that kind of person talks to me, they're like, yeah, but I didn't even know. It can't just be like, oh, this mind-body thing, because I didn't even know that that gluten particle was in the food. And I'm like, yeah, it's not necessarily your fear of that thing or your worry about it. It's that thing in and of itself, that particle of gluten
that
your body, right? It's a subconscious, it's a warning signal. It's a red flag saying like, danger, danger. Last time you ate this thing, something really, traumatic and shocking happened. And by traumatic and shocking, I don't mean like a huge life trauma. That could be the case, but it can also be, overhearing as a kid. Say you overheard your parents having a really big fight and that was really indigestible to you. That could absolutely cause, and if you were eating a sandwich or something while that was going on, gluten could be what we call tracked in. It could become a track. And so tracks can also be very conscious, like they can be touching your face. You're aware that you're touching your face on some level, right? It's not like, oh, the gluten that was in your food that you literally had no clue about. So there absolutely can be things that involve, the thought patterns, dreams, the content of dreams can be tracks. I mean, so many things it can be tracks, but I think that it is important to differentiate that it doesn't necessarily need to be something that you're aware of. In fact, it's usually stuff that you're not aware of. So
yeah. Well, I'd love to share an example actually about gluten. Just thought of it as we were talking. So I had a friend come visit me back when I lived in Seattle, and we went to Denny's, and she had, I don't think she had like diagnosed as celiacs, but definitely an intense gluten allergy. So on Denny's menu, there's like a gluten-free section, and she got like the gluten-free pancakes and then some eggs and some kind of meat. And there ended up being, like you just said, the cross-contamination. And she literally had to run to the bathroom and had vomiting and diarrhea, like really bad at the restaurant. And it was this, this whole big thing. And right, like they were supposed to be gluten-free, right? And so in this case, this friend, she went through the epi crisis with the vomiting and the diarrhea. She went through the healing crisis, right? And but for her, this happened so quickly that then the symptoms that she had, and it sounded like her, her tracks with gluten were very intense, hence her very intense symptoms. And so again, like Abigail said, we're not saying that, oh, it's all in your head or it's not real, or, oh, you just made yourself throw up or something. Like, no. But the body, your subconscious, your body knows, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know about you guys listening, but for myself personally, I want to be in a place where, okay, let's say I have a track with something, whether it's a food or I actually had some symptoms when I was listening to this particular song a few years ago. I'll get into that later because it's very interesting. But I want to be able to go out and, if I hear that song, when I'm not in control of it, right? Where let's say I'm going out to eat at a restaurant and I hear that song, right? And then I start having symptoms, and it's something that I can't control. And so the amazing thing about becoming conscious of these tracks and resolving them, it's not always like, oh, then now I'm just going to eat a bunch of gluten all the time and just, I love it so much. I mean, if you want to do that, go right ahead, because I love bread. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to go all in on the thing that was your track, but to be able to be resilient and able to, eat the thing, be around the person that triggers you. And that's a big one. Or be in, a place where you're hearing the music or hearing the sirens. I've had clients that have had really bad responses to hearing like police sirens or fire truck sirens. And to be in a place where you can kind of handle that is is really helpful for living our day-to-day lives, where we can't control all of these things that are happening outside of our homes, or what we're able to control. And so if you're listening and you have a lot of symptoms with a certain tract, like, no matter what anyone's told you, especially medical professionals, that doesn't have to be an allergy or a tract forever. Like, you can resolve it. It is possible. It might take some detective work, some time, some patience, but like, you're not stuck with it forever. Like a lot of us have been told that, oh, I'm just going to have celiacs forever. Oh, I'm just going to have sinusitis with this pollen, and I have to move because it's never going to go away. But really, when you figure out what that track is, and you kind of figure out how to make peace with it, whatever that looks like for you, it essentially becomes a non-issue. And yeah, it's really cool. So
I mean, we've both heard stories of people who have, because I think also people think that this only applies to like sensitivities, or like, I'm talking about food here, that tracks they can see and they understand on a conscious level. They're like, okay, yeah, that makes sense to me, that certain people who maybe had a conflict shock happen, and then gluten or the dairy was like on the scene. I understand how that person might have a sensitivity then to that, and it gets really tied up in this emotional talk gobbledygook, I think, too. Like people like, you have to understand, it's very biological. It is not, oh, I had a bad emotion while I was drinking milk. Like this has to be a biological conflict shock. You were caught off guard. It was distressing. You felt alone in that moment, which we won't get super into that now, but it's not just about like, oh, I have bad feelings about milk, so that's why it's triggering me. Like there's something specific going on for a very specific purpose. Your body is trying to protect you. This is biological. This is not just, this gobbledygook of, bad emotions, right?
Maybe there are emotions attached to the track, or emotions themselves can be tracks.
It could be, or emotions are the result of the conflict that you experienced.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Can I jump in with my example?
Yeah. Go ahead.
I have lots of examples of very interesting track stuff. So
I completely forget what I was going to say anyway. So I get started, I forget where I'm going.
So
go ahead.
So I had a friend in G&M. He was a practitioner, and he told me this story about pizza. And I remember I was in a group call with him and some other G&M coaches, and he was sharing that he had just figured out his pizza tract. And he was sharing that every time he got pizza from this particular pizza place, he would always get like very angry and aggressive. And he was just like, he couldn't figure it out for a little while, and was a little stumped. And but on the call, he shared with us that he had figured out what the track was about the pizza. And he was like, he's like, I can eat the pepperoni separately, I can eat the gluten, I can eat the sauce, I can eat the cheese. He's like, all those things separately. He's like, it's fine. But every time I eat pizza from this specific pizza place, I don't remember the name. He's like, I have these, like, it sounded like he went into the aggressive constellation. And so then he had behavioral symptoms instead of physical symptoms, like we've mostly focused on so far on the podcast. And he was like, I finally remember what it was. And he was living in a place. I think he had some roommates, and he was kind of in this kind of a fight with one of his friends, and his friend was really upset with him. And for some reason, it came out that he threw the pizza at the front door, because the friend was so mad at him. And so this person, he wasn't even eating the pizza, when he had the conflict shock. Like, it was about the pizza being thrown at the door, the friend being mad at him, this whole situation. And he would, like, the door was shut, but he saw what had happened, right? And he was in communication with this friend that was mad at him. And so he ended up, right, the pizza became a track, and for him it put him into the aggressive constellation. So it showed up as aggression and anger. And sometimes, that anger would show up kind of, out of nowhere, right? It's not like he was already angry about something. Like, he would be fine, calm, chill, and then eat this pizza, and it was like immediately, like, he'd be like, what is this? Like, what is this? This is crazy. And so
Yeah.
constellations can be the same way. We step on a track, and if we have the first conflict is already active, then we can have the behavioral shift almost immediately, because that track is then putting us into the behavioral symptoms and not just the physical symptoms. So yeah, super interesting.
That is such a cool story. I love that so much. Okay, so I remember what I was going to say earlier. I got a little off track.
Oh, don't get off track when we're talking about tracks.
Oh yeah, you're right. You're right. Okay, so what I was saying is that it's very understandable for a lot of people that, you can have food sensitivities, like certain foods can be tracks for, like kind of mild symptoms or a tummy ache or a sore throat or, a wide variety of symptoms, right? But what people really have a hard time wrapping their head around is stuff like anaphylactic shock reactions, like allergies, full-blown allergies, right? Or even something like celiac. They understand, like, maybe gluten sensitivity could, have this mind-body component to it, but a full-blown gluten allergy, like, oh no, that's something that either you're born with or you develop, and it's just not even genetic. I don't think that they even know what, like, really causes that, but there's just this belief that, oh, you're stuck with it. Like, once you have that, it's of course the gluten's, evil, but some people believe it's like, well, bad and not helpful. But then other people believe, oh, this, I have celiac, right? I was diagnosed with it. This is an actual allergy. I will be in the hospital if I eat it. And they're right. That's absolutely true. But they also have this belief that, well, that can't be a track because that's like a actual real allergy. So there's this difference between, like, oh yeah, it's just a sensitivity. Yeah, that maybe that could be related to tracks, right? But with an actual allergy, people are like, well, no, if a strawberry is a track for someone and say that's related to, it causes them to go in anaphylactic shock, is, and again, it depends on the type of conflict that they experienced while eating that thing, and then also the severity of that conflict, that conflict load. So yes, if someone has an anaphylactic reaction every time they eat shellfish, strawberries, anything like that, that is absolutely a track. And that's, I think, what also people have a hard time understanding, especially if a baby was born with an allergy, which I know we recorded a podcast. Hopefully this one will be coming out in the next few months, but it's all about raising children with GNM knowledge. It was a fantastic interview with Annie Heatley, and she shared about her daughter's dairy allergy. And I think also what a lot of people have trouble understanding is that, someone can be born with food allergies or allergies to different things, and that will relate to conflicts that the mother experienced or that the fetus experienced, while in utero, or while the baby was quite young, can absolutely experience conflict shocks. So I think that that's another thing I kind of wanted to cover, because I feel like there's a lot of people who are maybe, open to this idea, and they can see how it's plausible and it kind of makes sense. But then there are a few things that's like, well, but not that. That's, that doesn't quite add up to me, because it's too severe, right?
Yeah, but that, when it's more severe, that just points to the fact that the original conflict shock was very severe and intense, and it fit the criteria of a conflict shock, and maybe also you were conflict active for longer than with other stuff. So when you had the resolution symptoms, it was more intense.
Right. And it also explains
And
though why, and I know Annie gets into this when we talk about her daughter's dairy allergy and how that resolved. But, a lot of kids grow out of their initial food allergies. And that's why, is because something that was a really big deal for them as perhaps an infant, they outgrow it. Our perception changes and shifts as we get older. Things that were really big conflicts for us when we were in high school are no longer really relevant to us in our, 30s, for example.
Yeah, I mean, even why someone grows out of, having acne, or why acne is so prevalent for teenagers, because your body's changing, your hormones are changing, and a lot of teenagers are very self-conscious, and everything feels like an attack. And you also feel dirty because you're growing. Maybe you're going through puberty, maybe at a different time than your friends, or the same time, and everyone's kind of having their own experience, but it's like, everything is new. And so we also talked about this in the interview with Annie, that some things with children are like, they can have more conflict shocks because everything is a first time that they go through something, like it's the first time. And that can be similar with tracks and allergies. It's like, for a child to go through something for the first time, let's say the mom leaving to maybe go back to work, right? The maternity leave's over, like, okay, bye, see ya, time to go back to work, you're going to go to daycare. That is the first time this baby or small child is having that experience. So they're more susceptible to the conflict shocks, and then also more susceptible to having tracks with things, because they're having so many first time experiences that their little brains are like, how do I deal with this? And so, yeah, and it makes sense. And right, like, just like what Abigail said, they can grow out of them. And because what was relevant then is not always relevant now. But then if something does keep coming up, right, in these hanging healings, or there's a track, or even for me personally, I had acne past my teenage years, because that conflict was still active, and getting through puberty wasn't enough for me to resolve those conflicts.
Have you ever thought about how typically older adults like really never deal with breakouts or acne? And I think it's because by the time they get to a certain age, they just stop caring.
They don't care. Like, I used to work in a nursing home, and they don't give a like about so many things. They say the craziest things, and like, they just don't care, because it's not important anymore. And like it once was, which is, so interesting socially, even to think about that.
Yeah. And I also think it's important to highlight the fact here that whatever track, so there can be, several different, really anything can potentially be a track. So you have the track, but then the type of symptom that you experience after you step on that track will always point back to the type of conflict you experienced in that initial conflict shock moment. So that's why one person, and again, think about it, if gluten was so bad in a certain way, like that it would cause everyone to have, say, digestive issues, which not everyone does experience digestive issues with eating gluten, by the way, so you have to think about this logically, like, okay, this does not create the same symptom in everyone, but there are some people that will eat something like gluten and experience skin rashes, or they'll experience some other symptom. So we have to look at, okay, what type of symptom is the person experiencing after they step on that track? Because that's going to be your biggest clue as to what unresolved conflict is still going on in your life, or I should say chronic conflict that you continue to experience.
Yeah, exactly. Like when people say, oh, I have a dairy allergy, like a client or even someone I'm just talking to that, like, wants to learn more about German medicine, I'm like, what is your symptom? Because that points to the conflict, whereas the track itself is not, I mean, it is the problem, but it's also not, right? Like, so person A and person B can have an allergy to milk and have right? Different symptoms. So it's not really about the track, or in this case, the milk. It's about the symptom itself. And that's actually what's more important. And okay, let's go to the pollen example. So many people are like, oh yeah, I'm allergic to, so I live in Austin, and a lot of people are like, oh, it's like cedar fever, right? Oh, I have like all these symptoms to cedar, right? Which they're not wrong, right? I'm not saying like, oh, it's all in your head, but every symptom has a meaning. So if somebody says, oh, I have this allergy to cedar, and I'm like, okay, what are your symptoms? Sinus issues and watery eyes. Those are two different conflicts, two different ones. So also, like, some things get lumped together as, oh, I have like seasonal allergies, but it's multiple conflicts going on. It's not just one thing either. So we can also have one track that starts multiple programs, and you have multiple symptoms with one track or allergen. And because maybe at the time when you were on the playground, right, and then you couldn't see your mom, you thought your mom had left, and you had a visual separation conflict, and there was, we'll just stick with the cedar example. It was like high pollen time for the cedar trees. I'm not saying that correctly, but whatever that's called, because I don't have seasonal allergies, so I don't know the terms. But you're at the park, and there's it's springtime, there's a lot of cedar around the park, and you think your mom has left you at the playground. Like, especially as a young child, like that is definitely a cause for a possible conflict shock. And so you have a visual separation conflict, right? And you have like the watery eyes, and maybe you also have a stink conflict. So you get all stuffy and sneezy, and but you don't have those symptoms until your mom comes back into view. You're like, oh, mom didn't leave me at the park by myself, right?
Resolution.
Yeah. And so that's when we have the symptoms. And I'm going to share an example about eye stuff that I had last year. So last year I was in a pretty bad car accident. My car got totaled and had some injuries, which we're going to talk about all of my learnings from that in a separate episode, because it's quite fascinating, like injuries in German medicine. And anyway, but the track story I wanted to share is eye symptoms, is actually the visual separation conflict. And so I would get in my car and I was driving, and I wouldn't have the blurry vision every time I would drive. And so it took me a few months to figure out what was going on. So I only had the blurry vision when I was driving. If anyone else was driving and I was sitting in the passenger seat or the back seat, if I was in an Uber or something, no eye symptoms. It was only when I was driving. And I wouldn't have the symptom every time I drove. It was only sometimes. And so I was like, okay, there has to be a pattern here somewhere. Like, this is not adding up. And like I said, it took me a little bit to figure it out. But one day I was getting on the highway going to work, and finally was consciously able to see this store sign. It's like a Goodwill restore, like people bring their stuff and they sell it. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is the intersection where I had the car accident. And I wasn't actually driving through the intersection, but I was going the same direction when I had the car accident, but I was getting like on the on-ramp to the highway, and it was in the right side of my like peripheral vision. And I realized, I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't want to see that sign. I don't want to have this reminder, and the visual separation conflict is like, get out of my sight. I don't want to have this reminder of this traumatic car accident. Like, my brain is like trying to help me forget, right? So the blurry vision is like, so you don't see the visual thing that you want to be separated from. but while you're driving, that's like a little dangerous. And I was like, okay, like I want to get past this so I feel confident driving again.
Yeah.
And so when I figured that out, I actually started crying. I was on the way to work. I was like, oh, like it's safe to see that sign. And it's like safe to see where the accident happened. And it was just like this moment. And so on the way to work, and it was just crazy. And now I can drive past the intersection, through the intersection anyway, see those store signs, other places, and no symptoms.
Wow.
And the only thing that I did, I actually didn't use any tools from my toolbox. All I did was just like purposely look at it as I'm getting onto the highway, like safely. But and reminding myself, like, okay, it's okay to see this. It's safe to see this sign. It's safe.
Yeah.
I'm okay. And I haven't had any vision symptoms. Like after doing that for a little bit, it took my psyche a little bit longer than just the one time.
Sure.
My psyche was like, "Are you sure it's safe? Like, are you sure?"
Yeah. Do you want to describe a little bit about going off of that, what it looks like to resolve a track? I know you just shared your story, but maybe share how it can look a little different for different people. Like, some people, they consciously understand, oh, this is a track. Oh my gosh, I know what the initial conflict shock was, and I know my track. And then the symptoms just kind of instantaneously are gone. They just vanish and they never have them again. The difference between that and then someone on the other end of the spectrum who maybe, is maybe aware of what their tracks are, but has not been able to get any, I guess, symptom relief. Like they still have symptoms when they encounter the track. Do you want to kind of like describe the, how that can look for different people and the different factors in that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, overall, like what I usually start off like with myself and my clients is this feeling of safety, right? Because anytime we have a conflict shock, is that there's only like two buttons that our body can push in a moment in time. Am I safe or am I unsafe? Like, am I going to live or am I going to die? Right? And it seems kind of dramatic, but biologically, like
We're dramatic beings.
that's how we operate.
We are.
And so working on your overall feeling of safety from moment to moment, day to day, that's kind of how I start, with clients that I've worked with. And then with specific tracks, it can take some deeper work, some deeper, like investigating. But honestly, it's about getting your conscious mind on board with the fact that this thing is not dangerous, right? And however that looks for you. So that could be journaling, meditating on it, like saying, like I was saying about the face yoga and going through the intersection. Like for me personally, like saying the new statement out loud or saying the thing that maybe I want to be true but doesn't feel true in that moment, or like reminding myself that I'm safe and okay in this moment is really powerful, because when the original conflict shock happened, we weren't safe and okay in that moment. Right. There was a danger, or at least a perceived danger. And so kind of getting your conscious mind on board and practicing awareness of what are your thoughts around when you eat gluten, or, when it's seasonal allergy time of the year, or, like even like seasonal affective disorder, like is a track where wintertime, like things happen when it's dark outside, right? And so people have this association with seasons of the year. And so and then also practically, like how can you maybe avoid the track for a certain time, or like, let's say if it's a person, for example, or a family member, or a friend, or a place of work, right? And you switch jobs, or you're no longer in that relationship anymore, or maybe this family member passes away, just for some examples. And that's a way to, essentially avoid the track is, don't spend as much time with that person until you can downgrade your relationship with them, so that when you do go back and you spend time with them, or you do go back and start eating the food, that maybe your symptoms aren't as bad and there's still some things to work on there, or maybe there's nothing at all because it's not a thing anymore, right? It's a non-issue.
Right. If it's not relevant anymore.
Yeah.
Which I think, but that's what was happening with you with the car accident. It was no longer that conflict was resolved, right? So that's, I think, why for you, that once you brought that into conscious awareness of the track, it's like, oh, I don't need to, this doesn't need to be a reminder for me anymore, because that conflict is no longer relevant. So, but for other people who are experiencing tracks and they're like, well, I'm very aware of what my tracks are and I know that they're tracks, but they're still causing symptoms. It's like, well, yes, because the underlying conflict is still probably very relevant to you. It's still recurring. It's still active.
And so look at that, like even for me, even though I've like mostly resolved the acne stuff, like there are certain people in my life, when I spend time with them, I do have breakouts after I leave. And so what within myself is kind of primed for feeling attacked or feeling soiled or dirty. And so when you can get to a place within yourself that somebody can say whatever they want to me, and I know within myself I'm fine, and what they're saying kind of, like that childhood saying, like, I'm rubber, you're glue, anything you say bounces off from me and sticks to you, right? It's like it's no longer an issue because you're a different person. And that's the beauty of resolving conflicts and tracks, is that you become this person that thing no longer triggers this cellular adaptation or behavioral adaptation, because it's not really a thing anymore, because it's no longer relevant to your psyche, to your experience. And it doesn't always happen in a moment. It can, and it's really cool when it can, and it's really exciting and fun to share and talk about and share, stories. But sometimes there are just this pattern, like repatterning of your psyche, that you kind of have to just keep doing until it's no longer an issue, right? And that might take some time. And that process can look different for every person. There's no one right way. There's many ways, because every person is different, right? Like some clients I recommend journaling and meditation, and other clients I'm more practical with what they need to do. It depends on the situation, the person, their personality, and there's no one right way to kind of get through that. So it's also this whole journey of German New Medicine is really about self-understanding and self-awareness, so that you can find what works for you, because it's different for every person, and sometimes different for like situation to situation, right? So
totally. And I think that this brings up a good point, that it's not always as obvious as we want it to be, finding the tracks. I think that's
unfortunately.
So like, of course, we're telling stories, and I'll tell one just in a minute about tracks that we've uncovered. But what you don't see is all of the time that we've spent trying to figure out our tracks and symptom journaling and becoming a different version of ourselves, cultivating awareness. Like this is a process, and a track might not always be as obvious as like gluten and dairy and some of the food ones, because when you step on that track, when you eat the food and you notice the symptom, that's pretty obvious what that track is. However, when it's a thought pattern, right? Or, maybe a person that you're around, or I once had a track around someone's tone of voice and, and the look that they gave me. Like, it wasn't even about the content of what they were saying. It was a specific tone of voice that was a track for me. So I think that, and that took months to pick up on. That took me months to really like uncover that. And I think that that's what a lot of people might not maybe like to hear so much, is that it's not always super crystal clear and obvious. And sometimes it does take some really conscious awareness work to bring our tracks into conscious awareness and figure out what they are. And then what, based on the symptoms we're having, what the underlying conflict is. So anyway, I guess I'll tell my story now of, oh gosh, a stink conflict that I had for a very long time. And it was just kind of all the time. Like, I really pretty much always had a stuffed up nose, and like sinuses felt like a lot of sinus pressure and like blocked. And there were so many different things in my life that could have been the root of that stink conflict. I mean, there were so many different things that stunk to me, that sucked, that irritated me, that annoyed me. That's kind of the flavor of a stink conflict, right? Which is going to cause an adaptation in the nasal mucosa. So anyway, it was very difficult to find out, like, okay, well, what was the initial conflict? I don't even know. But still to this day, I have not narrowed down the exact initial conflict moment.
Yes.
But yeah, which you can totally resolve stuff even if you never figure that out.
You don't
I just
need
want
to know.
Emphasize that.
Yeah.
But I was trying to gain some clarity around my tracks. And this was, I don't know, about a year ago, I'd say. I was I think I was sitting somewhere reading a book. Okay. And I was reading this book, and I remember very well what the book is. I'm not going to say the name of the book because that's besides the point, but it was this book about like manifesting and kind of like, I don't know, how to, probably a little bit like law of attraction, but like how to get what you want out of life. And it's like some spiritual something or other book. Right. And I remember I started reading it, and the girl that wrote this book, and again, part of me is a little ashamed to tell this story because I'm like, oh, wow, that doesn't make me look very good. And I think that's my hesitation to share a lot of my conflicts, is they're about really stupid stuff, you guys. Like the content of my conflicts is usually stuff that I'm kind of like embarrassed to tell people, because I'm like, wow, I'm pretty shallow, or like, wow, I can't believe that annoyed me. But my exact thought while reading the book was, who does this, biatch think she is? Like, this really like basic white girl spirituality. Like, I mean, she was certainly not very old. And again, this is saying nothing against her. This was my gut reaction to reading this, though. It was this annoyance at like, who do you think you are? Like, like from reading just a little bit, it was very clear that she had not really dived super deep into any like meaningful awareness work. It was like stuff that you could read on an Instagram post kind of thing. And part of me was annoyed that I even was taking the time to read this book. Like, I already wasted 15 minutes of my life reading this nonsense, which was just like, oh yeah, like, align your chakras and your crystals and manifest your dreams. And after reading her intro and a little bio on her, it was very obvious she was like a trust fund child. But then she was talking about how she manifested this money. And I'm like, well, you were kind of born into money. And so it was like even more annoying. And she, manifested this great partner. And I'm kind of thinking, I don't know, it was just like really annoying to me. And I mean, I'm sorry if you're really into like some of the, crystal, spiritual, whatever, but I'm, not. And a lot of that, what I was reading in the very basic manifestation 101 that you could probably read on, just through Googling it, but she's coming across as if she's this big like guru, I guess. And she has made a lot of money and gotten very popular, I think, through kind of dumbing down like the concept of manifestation and spirituality for like basic white girls, essentially, is that's like the vibe that I was like picking up on. And I was really just annoyed. And I was like, who does she think she is? But then there was also, again, ashamed to admit this, but there was an element of envy, I would say, or some jealousy, which I don't like to admit that was in me, but it definitely was. It was like, wow, if she can like know so little basically, and like, you know, kind of barely touch the surface of like, I don't know, awareness where like, but yet she's doing so well and so successful, like, again, you know, looking at her background, it's not exactly like she was ever like really struggling kind of thing, but I don't know. I think that there was definitely an element of envy to that. Like,
Yeah.
oh, that's not fair. That sucks that she has, you know, she's getting all of this praise and, you know, whatever for, again, portraying this very kind of cheapened version of like, you know, crystals and meditation and manifestation 101 kind of stuff. Right. So, yeah, anyway, that was my little story with that. But I noticed that as soon as I was reading that, and I started immediately, like my whole nose just stuffed up. Like I became instantly, I would say within 10-15 minutes of reading that book, it was like it went from like 0 to 100. Like, you know, my nose had been kind of fine just a few minutes earlier, and then all of a sudden it was like all stuffed up. And I was like, whoa, what was I just, because I had been learning about GNM, right? I was, you know, pretty deep into studying GNM. And so I had been trying to find my tracks, but it was hard because my nose was stuffy, like pretty much, you know, all the time. But I noticed that this one day in particular, I was like, oh, my nose went from being like maybe a little stuffy to like really stuffed, like in a really dramatic, you know, like a short time frame, right? And so that's when I asked myself, okay, what am I doing right now? What am I thinking about? And I'm like, well, I'm reading a book. And then I asked myself, well, what was I just thinking? You know, because you're never just reading a book, right? You're having you're having thoughts about what you're reading, like, you know, what you're reading is passing through a certain perceptual lens. And so you have to remember you're never just thinking nothing, right? You're never just reading a book. Like, so I'm like, okay, well, what am I thinking about? How am I feeling about this book? And I was like, this book sucks. That's what I was thinking about this book. And also, this girl is really annoying me, the author of this book. And actually, I'm going to stop reading it right now. And I did. But I mean, I was like, you know, 1 or 2 chapters in, right? But yeah, that was my story about how I uncovered this track for me. And it was not, this is the thing though, it's not just that particular book or that particular author. I realized that one of my big tracks was actually social media, because I would have that exact thought pattern and those exact feelings of, you know, a little bit of envy, a little bit of jealousy, a little bit of like, who are they to think that they're all that, or, you know, whatever, like, or, oh, that's so like basic, or whatever. I'm a very judgy person, as you can tell. I think we're all more judgy than we'd like to admit, but
True.
you know, one of my big tracks was social media, right? Which I would, you know, open up and scroll through several times a day. So wonder why my nose was stuffy like pretty much all day. It's because I was stepping on that track all the time. And I think that for me, a big part of resolving this, I would say, I mean, I still have, you know, the nose stuffiness on and off just a little bit, but I mean, it's at least 90% better. It is a night and day difference from this time last year. So, I mean, I went from having, I mean, I was like seeing ENT doctors and all this stuff, you know, in the past several years. And I went from having this constant kind of pain in my sinuses and stuffiness and not being able to like breathe through my nose to like now I can breathe through my nose just fine, barely have any stuffiness. So I think there's still a little bit of that conflict that's still active for me, but I've downgraded it like 90%, so much. And most of it was through that initial realization that, oh my gosh, this is a big deal for me. Look at the thoughts I'm thinking. Wow, I'm really annoyed right now. Why is what some stranger, you know, the actions or, you know, what some stranger has written about in a book, why does this bother me so much? Why is this so irritating? You know, because I would get annoyed by people quite easily. And I'm like, why am I this easily annoyed by people? And it had to do with my perception. That's what it
Yeah.
all boiled down to, why I could even have that conflict in the first place. So, for me, that realization was a big deal of, oh my gosh, I'm scrolling through social media and I'm getting a stuffy nose because I'm seeing all these people I'm, judging and annoyed by, and, this sucks that oh, look at them, they're so successful and I'm not, or something along those lines. Right. So yeah, that was my story.
Well, and what's interesting about the sting conflict is it's a flavor of a separation conflict. So there is, when it affects the mucosa, there
Right.
is a little bit of this push-pull, like, right? I
Mhm.
want what they have, but also I don't want to be like them.
Yes, that's exactly, I've never articulated it that
Mhm.
well, but that is exactly what it was.
Thanks.
Like, they annoy me and I don't want to be like them, but I also want what they have. Yes.
Exactly.
Exactly that.
Exactly. And
Yep.
I'll share a quick story about this. It's also a stink conflict. Very similar flavor, but slightly different because I'm a different person. Um, but similar thing with the scrolling. I used to be a nurse, if you guys didn't know that. And I went to nursing school with some great people and some people with less than ideal bedside manner. We'll just say it that way. We'll say it nicely. That, I would not stick my worst relative with if they were in the hospital and they worked on that floor. And I was scrolling on social media and I saw some wedding photos of this one particular person. And I was like, how can someone like that, with her specific personality and, in my opinion, a lack of kindness and compassion, and just we'll just say that, because
Yeah.
that's the truth.
I already went
And
there, so.
I like, how can this person, attract someone great? I mean, I don't know her husband, but and have this beautiful wedding, and just like, but like, how can someone like that, right? That in my opinion was not someone that I want to be like, but
Yeah.
how can someone like that find and attract and marry someone, and have these beautiful wedding photos? And I have no idea how their relationship actually is, but from social media, right, that my interpretation was
Sure.
like, oh my gosh, like, this is beautiful, and like, right, I want what she has, but not in the way that she has it, not the way that she is. And I was sneezing. So that's also the stink conflict. That's the epicrisis. But I would go through the 2-phase cycle and then get to the epicrisis and sneeze. And so I kind of was playing this little game with myself, and I saw a picture, sneeze, and I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And then I kept scrolling. I was on Facebook, and then I was like, oh, I'm gonna go back to. I'm like, I'm gonna test myself, and I went back to the picture, and I like sneezed again, and then I would like get it off, and then I would like sneeze, and it's like so funny because I'm like, oh,
Wow.
this is crazy, right? Like, I'm just seeing pictures of people, like, I knew the bride not very well, but pictures of people I know getting married, and like, I want that, but I don't want it in the way that she has it, right? And this was that flavor of annoyance, frustration, push pull of, I want what she has, but not in the way that she has it, right? I want my own version of that, and I don't have that yet. And it's just like so interesting because, like I was saying earlier, like, being aware of your symptoms like gives you such an introspection of yourself and who you are, and like how you see the world and how you interact with the world. And that's why everyone is so different. And that's why, like, clients that I work with, it's not just do this one thing. It's not all across the board, because each person is different, and each person's experience and perception is so different from, one to the next. And but it's just always fascinating to see this stuff, play out in your own life, because I would never recommend someone to just believe German new medicine on faith, right? Or just like, oh, well, this
Right.
just is what it is. It's like, how can you apply it to your own life, to your own moment by moment experience and see, oh my gosh, I stepped on a track and then I had this symptom. Like, what? So really
Yeah.
like practice this for yourself and start to see, you know, the two-phase cycle, the conflict, active, resolution, and then symptoms. Like you have the conflict shock, you step on the track first, and then you have symptoms. And because you will be able to tune in to yourself and how you're seeing the world in a very different way than maybe you ever have in your life. I mean, I've gotten to know myself very well, especially since learning German new medicine. I'm like, okay, yeah, like, yep,
Yeah.
maybe I am sometimes kind of petty or judgmental or, you know,
I'm definitely like that a lot of the time, I think. And
yeah,
I hate to admit it. And it does not match the person that I want to be. I get like, it doesn't match what I want other people to think about me or what I want other people to see in me. But when I'm looking at, okay, but who am I really? What's really going on? What's the content of my conflicts? And there's a lot of ugly stuff there, man. Some stuff that I'm still not even ready to share about on the podcast because it's so embarrassing or shameful, or like, I don't want people to know that about me, that, you know, like, so I think that this was a good first step, right? Like dipping my toes in the water. But yeah, I mean, I'm admitting I'm very judgy at times. We all are, I think, most of us. You know, we can be very petty. We can,
into it.
right, we can be very jealous. And I mean, all these, you know, human things, right? But that stink conflict of, oh, this is annoying. This sucks. You know, this is, well, how would you describe it? Like, I want what they have, but not in the way that I don't want to be like them, but I want what they have. Like,
exactly.
You know, our conflicts can bring out some pretty, it can shine a light on some of the nastiest stuff going on in us.
Yeah.
And I think that it's important for people to realize that a conflict is not always like a nice, neat little tidy, like, oh yeah, it's from this, you know, trauma in your life. And, you know, like, what am I trying to get at? That some of it is some maybe not super serious stuff. Like with my stink conflict, it was not anything traumatic, right, that happened, but there was definitely this initial conflict shock moment that there must have been where, ooh, caught off guard by something that really annoyed me, that really stunk, probably something I saw on social media or in a you know, book I was reading, right? Like,
be
so
kind to Abigail and her DMs, please.
Yeah, please don't give me a
leave
conflict
us
shock.
nice reviews, guys.
But no, I think that it's also important for me to see that, okay, regardless of a DM I might get from someone, or, you know, something in my external reality, something I read, something I see on social media that, you know, triggers me or whatever, it's my perception of it.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
my perception is not necessarily reality. Maybe this girl that I was reading her book, maybe she's actually a really great, lovely human that actually really knows her stuff. But in my perception of that in the moment, that's not the vibe I was picking up on, right? That was not my perception. So I could have been totally wrong about the reality of, you know, her and her life kind of thing, right? I could be completely misreading her, misjudging her. And I totally acknowledge that. But again, in that moment where I was, you know, stepping on that track, you know, my go-to conflict of feeling annoyed and, oh, life's not fair. Oh, this sucks. That was what, you know, that was what my perception, you know, led me to. So
well, I'd love to share one more example.
Yeah, okay.
So many.
Then we'll wrap up.
Going back to the perception. So I mentioned earlier, I had symptoms when listening to a particular song, and wanted to share that because it's
go ahead.
Weird and fascinating. And yeah, gives you a look into my psyche. So, you know, you're welcome. So when I lived in Seattle, I had a very interesting dating experience with multiple people that were less than ideal partners for me. And there's one particular man that I was going to break up with because it just wasn't a good fit. And I had seen him become angry on multiple occasions, and he kind of he scared me. And I was like, okay, I cannot be around this person. I don't want to date him anymore.
Yeah.
Like there was a moment where I was just like, okay, you've reached my threshold and it's time to take action and to move on. So I was in my Jeep and driving to his apartment. I was like, oh my gosh, he's gonna get so mad and so angry, and he's gonna have like, an outburst like he had in the past. So I was freaking out and anticipating his reaction, right? And I was listening to this particular song by one of my favorite artists. Used to love this song, and I'm having this experience listening to the song, going to break up with this guy that I was like, yeah, it's done. And so I get there and I break up with him. I actually stayed in my car because I was that afraid of him, which I didn't realize until that moment. And so I was like, hey, this isn't working out. Like, I don't want to go on any more dates with you. Like, I wish you the best, but like, peace out. And he was not angry. He was actually very calm and very chill. And was just like, okay, I understand. Like, wish you well too. It was like very nice. And I drove away like, what just happened? Like, I was expecting this outburst and there was no outburst, right? But my perception and my honestly like projection onto what I thought would happen was enough to have that song be a track. So later on in the week, it's because it was on one of my favorite playlists at the time, I heard this song come on again. And I started having like panic attack symptoms, increased heart rate, increased breath, just really anxious. I'm not normally an anxious person. I'm pretty calm, pretty chill most of the time. And so it was like very out of character. And what's happening? Like it's out of nowhere. I'm like just driving down the road, like windows down. It was like nice outside. And then all of a sudden I'm like freaking out, like something bad's gonna happen. Like I felt my heart rate increase, my breathing increased. And I was like, what is this? And then it went away. Like it kind of it dissipated after like the song was like I moved on to the next song or something, or like the playlist continued and the symptoms kind of faded. And I was like, okay, that was weird. And so it took me a little bit to figure out, but I figured out that it was a particular song on this playlist that was this reminder of not even anything that actually happened, but my perception of what I thought was going to happen, that this person was going to be really angry at me, was going to have this outburst, maybe I was going to be unsafe. And it put me into the anxiety, the frontal fear constellation. And I had these, emotional and physical symptoms whenever I listened to this song. And like, I was just like, this is so weird. And this was, I don't know, like 4 or 5 years ago. Like I knew G&M pretty well already, but like hadn't experienced anything like this. And so I just kind of exposed myself to small bits of the song and just, again, going back to what I said earlier, reminded myself that I'm safe and okay. He cannot get me. Like he is not, he's not a problem. I'm not dating him. I'm never going to see him again. And if I do, I'm going to be okay. Like he's not the problem that the guy I broke up with. And it took me a little bit. But, now I can listen to this song and I'm okay. It's still not my favorite song because it just reminds me of him and how he treated me. But I can listen to the whole song the whole way through and not have any behavioral or physical symptoms. And it's great because, again, like I was saying earlier, I want to be and I want to help my clients or anyone, that we're working with to be in a place where you're not in control of your environment. You're at a friend's house, you're at a restaurant, maybe you hear the song, you eat the food and without knowing, right? And you want to be in a place where you can handle being around that track or that trigger, whatever it might be, and still be okay. And
Absolutely.
Because that's really important, because we have so many potentially unexpected things happen in our modern life that
Yeah.
to downgrade and be able to be around those things that maybe in the past were triggering and that now you can be around and you're essentially okay is really empowering, right? And is really powerful because
Absolutely.
so many times we've been taught that, oh, you're going to have this symptom forever, and it's just, it doesn't have to be true, so
Yeah.
I think those are all my
Absolutely.
examples.
Yay. Well, okay. I guess we'll go ahead and wrap this up. Just to remind people, I really want to highlight this point. Recurring conflicts in your life are what's going to lead to recurring symptoms. That's the big takeaway here for those of you taking notes studiously, as I'm sure you are. Just kidding. So, also when you're thinking about, and I think we'll have another episode just on how to actually resolve conflicts, both perceptually and practically, but just for those of you like, well, how do I resolve my tracks? How do I resolve my conflicts? If you can't, well, yeah, you can work with us if you're stuck. But I think a really good thing to keep in mind that has been really helpful for me, and that I've also told a lot of my clients, is actually something that one of my mentors, Dr. Melissa Sell, told me, and that's that when you improve the experience of what it's like to be you in every area of your life, then that you can't help but downgrade all of your conflicts, really. Yep. So by that, I mean, your relationships, your family, your career, your, community, friends, fitness. Yeah. All of these things. When you are so focused on what you do want, and when you're improving what it's like to be you in all of these different areas, you will downgrade and resolve conflicts in the process of that. So, this is all about, instead of narrowing in and looking closer and, doing our symptom journals, which is a great thing to do, by the way, but some people get so focused on, zooming in on each particular symptom, on finding every single track. They get so zoomed in and so focused that they forget to, take a step back, take a deep breath, zoom out, see the bigger picture, see the bigger pattern going on, see, okay, the chronic conflicts in my life, the recurring conflicts, the chronic patterns are causing these chronic symptoms, zooming out, seeing the big picture, seeing the kind of, the bigger picture of your timeline, right? Like, okay, around what time did this start? Even if I can't find the initial conflict, can I zoom out enough to see, okay, well, this was kind of going on around this time in my life. This was going on now. I wonder what some of my conflicts are about based on what symptoms I'm experiencing. And even if you can't identify every single track, or, exactly what the initial conflict moment, the initial conflict shock moment was, you can still work to downgrade and resolve, through just improving the experience of what it's like to be you. Truly, that's what it's about. So hopefully that will, end this episode with bringing you some peace and lightness, and, being in a spirit of hopefulness and possibility. And as Ashlee was saying, stepping into your personal power, that you do not have to live a life of just avoiding your tracks. Resolution is possible, downgrading is possible, healing is possible. So I think that's an important note to end on.
Thank you so much for joining us today and listening and possibly taking notes. And we hope to see you back on our next episode, and like and follow us, and we'll talk to you soon.
Bye, guys. We hope you enjoyed today's conversation. We appreciate you being here.
If you would like some additional support in navigating your health symptoms, we both provide coaching services from a German New Medicine perspective.
Our Instagram handles and personal websites are linked in the podcast description.